We are starting chapter 26, which is the beginning of the end. Another just general comment, Jesus is finished with his teachings and actually says very little from here on out. This is about what happens, but Jesus does not say much in the last 3 chapters of Matthew. So could I ask Susan if you could read verses 1 through 5?
When Jesus had completed all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that in 2 days' time it is the Passover feast, and the Son of Man is going to be delivered to be crucified." At that time, the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the courtyard of the high priest, who was Caiaphas, and took counsel together to seize Jesus by guile and to kill him. They said, "Not at the time of the feast, lest a tumult arise among the people."
Okay, now, notice that the priests are saying, we don't want to arrest him. We don't want to do anything during Passover. So remember that. And one other comment to make, and this is Matthew. Remember Matthew's design of his gospel, had great discourses. When Jesus had completed all these sayings, that's Matthew's way of saying, okay, this wraps up that discourse. Now we're starting something new. Matthew has Jesus reminding the disciples what's going to happen. At this point in Mark, the disciples are still clueless. So that's a little difference between those two. So Jesus is warning them again. And Barclay gives us some information about Caiaphas, including his first name, which was Joseph, who was the high priest. And you remember that the high priest rule, and I'd use that word very loosely, at the pleasure of Rome, and Rome was all about keeping the peace. So the high priest was all about keeping the peace if they wanted to keep their job. And Barclay has a statistic, and you know how I love my numbers here, that in a 104-year period, from 37 BC to 67 AD, there were 28 different high priests. So that works out to about 4 years per, or less than 4 years term per high priest. Yet Caiaphas manages to stay high priest for 18 years, which gives you an idea of just what a suck up he was.
Oh, is that the key to his success, huh?
Yes, he was a suck up to the Romans, so he managed an 18-year term. What Barclay says is that Caiaphas must have brought the technique of cooperating with the Romans to a fine art, and therein precisely lay his problem. So he basically sells his soul to the Romans to keep his job. So he says that at the Passover, the atmosphere in Jerusalem was always explosive, because remember, these people are, they're always looking for a way to get out from under whoever's occupying the land. And another statistic here, and I think we've seen this before, the governor at the time was Cestius, and he didn't think that Nero understood the number of Jews and the problems which they posed. So he asked the high priest to take a census of the lambs killed for sacrifice at a certain Passover time. This is from Josephus. He goes on to say, a company of not less than 10 must belong to every sacrifice, for it is not lawful for them to feast singly by themselves. And many of us are 20 in a company. It was found that on this occasion, the number of lambs killed was 256 8,500. So Josephus estimates that for that particular Passover, there were some 2,750,000 Jews in Jerusalem.
There would have had to
They
be.
had a hard time finding a hotel.
Well, further on in the chapter, Barclay, I think it was Barclay, I've read some other stuff, because the city itself was not big enough to hold all those people, they changed the law so that the suburbs legally constituted part of the city during this week.
Oh, so that's why they kept going out back out to Bethany.
Yeah. But, and so for a lot of stuff, but still the actual Passover feast had to take place within the city walls. So yeah, it was crowded. And you know, when people get in crowds, they get stupid.
So,
Good morning, Bernie.
Sorry I'm late. The grandkids were just leaving.
oh,
And I'm sorry, they trump you guys.
yeah, we get that.
Yeah.
Well, I can't imagine 275,000 lambs being sacrificed and roasted in Richmond, let alone in Jerusalem, which is a much smaller geographic area.
And the thing is, they've got to all be sacrificed at the temple. I mean, that's the whole point. They've got to be sacrificed and the blood has to be offered to God. And a sacrifice, this can't be just done out in Bethany because we redrew the boundaries for a week.
See, they really did have microwaves. They really did have microwaves.
Why?
Got that job done quick.
Yeah, so I'd love to know the logistics of how they made that happen.
I guess
They
they
must-
just sacrificed.
There were 72. Sanhedrin is, we always think of the 10, but that's the chief priest. There's 72 or 73, I forget which, Sanhedrin. So it was like a 24-hour a day nonstop deal. And they would swap off it. The priests got too tired. So, I mean, it took all 72 to do all that.
I wonder what the age of a lamb is considered, because I wouldn't think you'd find that many lambs. I mean, it seems like the lambs themselves would have filled up the temple.
I just didn't think the population was that great.
Well, you got to remember, people are coming from all over the diaspora.
Yeah, but I still didn't think it was that.
Apparently, because I know in a different place in the book, we figured out that from Josephus' description, the population just around the edge of the Sea of Galilee was over 2 million. We're at least in my mind growing up, I thought, 2,000 years ago, these are small little bitty country, little country towns, the way we've got little country towns here. But some of these places were big metropolitan areas.
But that whole area is so small.
Yeah, I just looked up what's the current population of Metro Jerusalem, and it's 944,000. So theoretically, metropolitan Jerusalem is similar in population, just a little bit smaller than Richmond.
So that's everybody having, 4 or 5 guests in the house.
So that would be sort of like,
There were a lot of people.
Yeah, there were a lot of people, and
A lot of people.
and Caiaphas was concerned about keeping the peace, and so he does not want to do this during the festival. But that's not the plan. And so Judas comes up with an idea, and Caiaphas takes the opportunity as it's presented to him and goes with it. So any other comments for this part? Okay, Kathy, would you read verses 6 through 13?
yeah, and I just looked up population. Oh, no, never mind. Sorry. All right, 6 through 13. So when Jesus was in Bethany, In the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster phial of very costly perfume and poured it over his head as he reclined at the table. When the disciples saw it, they were vexed. "What is the good of this waste?" they said, "for this could have sold for much money and the proceeds given to the poor." When Jesus knew what they were saying, he said to them, "Why do you distress this woman? It is a lovely thing she has done to me. For you always have the poor with you, but not me always. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me beforehand for burial. This is the truth I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the whole world, this too that she has done shall be spoken of, so that all will remember her."
This story is told in all 4 of the Gospels. Of course, the details differ. In Mark's story, it's almost the same. John adds information that the woman who anointed Jesus was none other than Mary, of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Luke does not tell this particular story, but he has one in the house of Simon the Pharisee, and the woman is a notorious sinner. And Barclay speculates, is Luke telling the same story? Of course, we don't know that much about Mary, except that she loved Jesus tremendously, and Barclay speculates that maybe the intensity of her love for Jesus is a result of some horrible thing he has forgiven of her. So whoever it was, oh, and he also makes the comment that to say that it happened in the home of Simon, it's like today saying it happened in the home of John Smith. There are 10 Simons named in the Bible in various stories. Josephus names 20 Simons. It was a very common name, and so just to say it happened in the home of Simon doesn't say much. So then Barclay goes on to say, regardless of these details, there are certain things that the story shows us. It shows us love's extravagance. And he goes on to talk about, how expensive the perfume was, and that it was the equivalent of a whole year's salary for a worker. And it's also the same amount of money that could have fed 5,000. So it was expensive. And that Jewish women at the time, and I shouldn't say at the time, because there's some women today who still love their perfume, they actually carried it on a chain around their neck. So they always had it with them.
Remember, they didn't have any deodorant back then. So even in the Victorian age, people carried little things of herbs around their neck.
Yeah.
Just smell them.
Thousands of lambs too.
Oh yeah, they had just sacrificed thousands of lambs too.
Oh, woo.
Okay.
Yeah,
then.
soap wasn't really popularly available until like what, the 1800s, something like that. One time I knew the history of soap.
Well, I do wonder where she would have come up with that much money to have that expensive perfume,
Yeah, it sounds like she might have been gotten it by ill means.
Well, now that's assumption. This passage doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't say that. She could have been a woman of means.
Yeah, Jesus had some wealthy women followers.
He did.
Somebody who will remain nameless just said she got it from Lazarus' life insurance policy.
Oh, low blow.
Yeah, really low blow.
Now, why
Which
is it,
they tried
when men
twice.
do stuff, all right, so I'm going to get my little soapbox here. So I'm not, that's kind of a low blow to assume that she was a woman of questionable practices to have done this.
But
We don't know.
well, you're the only one assuming that.
I was.
Oh, who was?
well, but even Barclay says that in Luke's story, the woman was a notorious sinner. There's no indication that was true of Mary of Bethany, and yet the very intensity with which Mary loved Jesus may well have been the result of the depths from which he had rescued her. So, Barclay talks about the possibility. So the point is, that curious minds want to know, but there's a lot of stuff here. There just is no way to know about.
Only God
Right.
knows.
So,
Only God
so a
knows,
lot of
and-
scholars make it up, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
we make up all this stuff, including Barclay. He's pretty good at, making stuff up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either
So-
way, however she came to have this oil,
Yeah.
she
So-
chose to.
She chose to use it in this way. And so
Mhm.
Barclay says it shows love's extravagance. And he goes on, and this is him really going over the edge, in my opinion, but y'all can talk. You can tell me if I'm wrong.
What page are you
Love-
on?
I'm on the middle of page 385. Love
Okay.
never calculates. Love never thinks how little it can decently give. Love's one desire is to give to the uttermost limits, and when it is given all it has to give, it still thinks the gift too little. We have not even begun to be Christian if we think of giving to Christ and to his church in terms of as little as we can respectively give.
Well, there's a big part of me that agrees with this.
Part of me agrees with it too, and part of me goes,
Part of me thinks, Barclay can tend to be kind of this, idealistic romantic. But I do think there is validity in striving for that ideal. Jesus taught it.
yeah,
It's like the older woman or whatever who gives out of her need, she gives a coin, in the temple, and he sees it and says, most people who are rich, give, but she gave something that would probably pay for her food for that day.
See,
Yeah.
I don't look at it and focus on the amount of money. I focus more on Jesus saying, don't just go along blindly doing what you've always done. Pay attention to what's happening right now, because I'm with you now. The poor will be here always. So pay attention to what's going on in front of your face instead of just marching along doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and Barclay does go into that there are certain things that have to be done when the opportunity arises. They can't ever be not done.
you can't turn the clock back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also points out that there are some times when the common sense view of things fails. And there's a world of difference between the economics of common sense and the economics of love. Gift is true, and here he goes again, a gift is truly becomes a gift only when there is sacrifice behind it, and when we give far more than we can afford. And of course, the former teacher of personal money management just cringes at that.
Yeah, because I don't think it comes down to the monetary value.
Uh-uh.
No.
Maybe more than you can afford in terms of giving of yourself.
Yeah.
Forget the money, it's giving of yourself and your time
Mhm.
and energy.
Thought of people who give of themselves, including their own life, to do something to save someone else. And isn't that what Christ was all about?
Mhm. That's always a tough one.
Yeah.
But I mean, it happens each and every day, in a small number, hopefully, but that it happens. So how do we this is what I've always struggled with, and that is, how do we as everyday people deal with that?
Well, that's the extreme, but that was just a thought that came. I was just thinking about what it's really about is giving out of love, and whether it's money or some action or something you have or you can get for someone. There's some giving, like Harold last week talked about a young man in a grocery store who didn't have a coat or something, so he went in and bought one, and that was almost a compelling, he was out there looking for this guy, as I remember the story, for a half hour or so. So that was kind of above and beyond, in a sense. It was some real love gift that you just feel compelled to give.
No, you missed the moral of the story. Moral of the story was I didn't give my coat. I
Well,
failed.
we gave you a pass on that, but
Oh,
the
yeah, well,
intention was,
The moral to the story was the man inside the store who had a strict rule about returning money relented to have, to help get this guy a coat, possibly. I mean, to me, that was the story that a guy had. It's like one of the parables, where I can't remember which one, but Christ says something to the effect that it doesn't matter so much what you say, but what you do. And this guy behind the store counter had rules. They cannot give refunds. And yet, when I pleaded my case, he said, okay. So that was the moral to the story. Yeah.
Maybe he was afraid of you.
But that story of Harold's also goes back to what Susan just talked about. Item number 3 in this list, it shows us that certain things must be done when the opportunity arises, or they can never be done at all.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and we've all been in situations similar to that. The next section here.
But Sarah, I also really like the part where Barclay calls the attention to what Jesus says at the very end. This person has done a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And that she'll be remembered when this gospel, for what she has done. And I see that as part of in Harold's story, I see that as part of the what I get out of it. The guy who finally gave the money back to you, Harold, is one thing, but I see you did a wonderful thing in going in and just buying that coat and trying to find that person.
And Barclay makes a statement. It tells us that the fragrance of a lovely deed lasts forever.
So we've been sort of bashing Barclay, but he does have a way with words sometimes.
Yes, he does.
I love Barclay. He's just not perfect.
Good. I'm glad he's not perfect.
Who is?
Yeah.
Right.
No, he's one of my favorite, commentators to go to. I agree. Okay. The next section, next couple of sections, what he does is we're going to go through Judas's story straight through. And then we'll go through the story of the Last Supper, because in the Bible, they're interspersed with each other. And so we're going to do some skipping around, but the story makes more sense this way. So this next section, we're going to be talking about Judas, and I'll read, this is verses 14 through 16. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" They settled with him for a sum of 30 shekels, and from that time he sought for an opportunity to betray him. And Barclay says there are only 3 reasons why Judas might have betrayed Jesus. So there are other suggestions, there are other variations, but basically it comes down to these 3 things. It could have been just pure greed. But he makes the point that this was actually not a whole lot of money. I mean, it was less than 6 months' pay. So if greed was the cause of the treachery, it was the most horrible example in history in terms of what love of money will do to you. He suggests that a second reason might have been bitter hatred based on complete disillusionment. The Jews always had their dream of power. They thought their Messiah would be a military ruler or high priest, somebody with authority. And if Judas had finally come to the realization that what Jesus was didn't match his dream, the disillusionment could have just turned into hate. Or number three, and I've heard this in other places, and Barclay makes a good argument for it, it could be that Judas never intended Jesus to die at all. It could be that he was trying to force Jesus's hand to prove to the world who he really was. And he could have thought that Jesus was moving too slow. Judas got impatient, and he's trying to just kind of move the agenda along. And the fact, and according to Barclay, in this view, it best suits all the facts, and that explains why Judas was killed himself when the plan didn't go according to plan. I mean, if he'd been looking to betray him and have him killed when Jesus died, he should have been happy with that, but he wasn't, which could be a real strong indication that it didn't turn out the way he wanted it to.
Right, so that one, I don't understand that one. So y'all can help me understand this.
Well, Judas thought Jesus was going to be a military Messiah.
Right, I get that. I get
Okay.
that, but I don't understand
that-
that third strategy that he just wasn't moving fast enough for him.
That Jesus was not moving fast enough. Judas wanted Jesus to show his power, take over, get the Romans out of the city, get the Romans out of the country. And so he thinks if he betrays Jesus, that when they come in to arrest him, Jesus will show his power, show his might, and that will be the beginning of getting the Romans out.
Because remember at the beginning of Matthew 26, Jesus tells them again, in 2 days, what's going to happen? I've told you before, I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be delivered to be crucified. Well, if you're a disciple who believes that Jesus is going to be the Messiah we all know for and come in power, then, I can see that Judas might say, well, I'm going to do something here that's going to force Jesus to show his power, and
circumvent this crucifixion he seems to think he's going for.
right. I don't believe that's what the Messiah is supposed to be doing. He should rise up.
Among the Apocrypha, is there not a Gospel of Judas that suggests that Jesus and Judas were in cahoots and the betrayal was a planned event to bring about the resurrection?
I believe, yeah. I haven't read it, but I understand that's what the storyline is.
Yeah, it's not part of the Apocrypha, but it was written, Harold, wasn't it written like a couple hundred years after Jesus was born?
I think that's right. I
Yeah,
haven't
so
read it
there's-
either. Yeah.
But yeah, but I
lot
think that's part of the premise of it, that
Yeah, a lot of stuff was written several to 300 years later that was just poppycock, trying to rewrite what happened and why it happened. So I haven't read a lot of that.
but that, so I guess, Matthew tells us, that the priests and stuff wanted to kill Jesus. And Jesus is saying to the disciples, I'm going to be crucified. So whether or not Judas understood, to give Judas the benefit of the doubt, did he understand what the high priests, what they were really looking to do?
Well, I think I'm buying to the line that, Judas saw all the things that Christ did. I mean, he raised people from the dead. He had absolute power. So I think probably Judas was trying to press his hand to become a military leader too by pushing events. I mean, I can see where that's very logical from where Judas is coming from. Um, he
I
knew,
don't know. I've always thought that Judas thought that Jesus was getting too big for his britches and it was becoming more about him than it was about the mission of helping the poor. And he was probably the loudest voice fussing about the woman with the oil. I think he resented him
Well,
I
then why
agree
did he
with
kill
that.
himself when
That's-
after Jesus died?
Yeah,
because I
agree with
think he didn't realize it was going to be as bad as it was. Maybe he thought he was just going to get punished, but he didn't realize he was going to get beaten and crucified.
Because, Matthew says it was the disciples when they saw this woman anointing Jesus with the oil. The disciples, it doesn't say in Matthew, it doesn't say Judas. It was the disciples that they were vexed by it.
Right. I just always in my mind imagine he was the loudest voice in that chorus.
Hmm.
Well, I think in one of the other gospels he is.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
Yeah, I'm with Nancy on the resentment aspects of it. I don't see the military side of it for a number of reasons. Number one, very little militaristic activities were portrayed or talked about by Jesus, number one. And number two, when you get into something like that, usually it's kind of like being a lawyer. You want to know the answer to your questions before you ask them. Well, somebody who's preparing some sort of a coup or arranging any kind of a military event, if they're behind it, they have their outcomes already known to them and all the options. And I don't think hanging himself was in that option. I think it's out of resentment. It's out of remorse at the end, probably. But I think this is more about human nature than it is about military power.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I finally had something semi-intelligent to say. That's why I've been quiet.
Okay. So then we go on to Jesus Jesus dealing with sin. And Barclay makes the point. I'll read this section too. When evening had come, Jesus was reclining at table with the 12 disciples. While they were eating, he said, "This is the truth I tell you. One of you will betray me." They were greatly distressed and began one by one to say to him, "Lord, can it be I?" He answered, "He who dips his hand with me in the dish, it is he who will betray me. The Son of Man is going to go away, as it stands written concerning him. But alas for that man through whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Master, can it be I?" He said to him, "It is you who have said it." And Barclay says that in terms of Jesus dealing with sinners, the first thing he does is to confront the person sinning. So Jesus looks at Judas and basically, according to Barclay, Jesus is letting Judas know that he knows what's about to happen. And
But without directly, because he's saying
Without-
basically the same thing.
Yeah,
So without directly saying Judas, yeah, I know it's you.
yeah. So Barclay implies that Jesus is trying to let him know, hey, I know who you are. And then that Jesus asked people to look at him and to say, "Can you look at me? Can you meet my eyes and go out and do what you intend on doing?" And then he talks about, he says there's sin and then there's sin. And he talks about the difference between sin that is spur of the moment, out of passion, and then there's cold, deliberate, premeditated sin, which is what this is, obviously. And that's the worst of the two.
Well, it's a side question. If Jesus knows the future and he knows that Judas is going to hang himself, why does he let that continue to happen? Why wasn't that part of history changed?
Well, the consequences of free will.
That's the only
You
thing
know,
I
we-
can come up with too, Nance. But it doesn't seem normal. Take all the teachings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, when he looked at him and basically said, I know what you're up to, and Judas didn't change, that was on Judas.
Well, Jesus sort of had his hands full about then. You know,
Yeah, but he's pretty good at multitasking.
yeah, he is, and but you know, also remember now Judas went back to the chief priest, Caiaphas, I think was the one he went to, and tried to get the money back, to call the whole thing off. So I mean, he was already beginning to regret what he'd done because he began to see it wasn't going the way he thought it was going to play out. And of
Well,
course,
see, that plays into my question, because if Judas was truly seeking forgiveness, you would think that he would have not, or he would have somehow been destined to not hang himself. I don't know. Didn't mean to cause such silence.
I always thought that, you know, Judas is just a part of the plan.
Yeah.
And so that's why I always thought that, hey, don't blame Judas, God. You had Judas in mind to do this,
Yeah.
to be a part of this plan.
Yeah.
All along.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
talking
if
about,
Judas hadn't done it, who would have?
yeah,
You know, what would have happened?
yeah, and talk about giving the money back. He went through the temple. You remember there's the court of the Gentiles and the court of the women, and then just the court of the men to get to the place where the high priests were. And he had to throw the money at them. And because the money was tainted, the priests couldn't put it back in the temple treasury. And they took it and bought a field where Gentiles could be buried.
Is that in the Bible?
Well, I think so, because Barclay talks about it here in a minute.
Okay. I've always thought, I don't know if always, but I've long thought that Judas perhaps was sort of a hothead, that he reacted more on emotion, that he wasn't necessarily a person that, you know, really thought through the consequences of his actions. I don't know. It's hard to know because, you know, we only have a few statements by him. So a lot of that is assumption too. But
He was the one they put in charge of their money, wasn't he?
yes,
Was Judas holding the money for the
Yes.
whole group? So people must have had some trust in him.
Yeah, Kathy, to answer your question, I'm just skipping a page ahead here. This is in the section of Matthew 27, 3-10. And he threw the money into the temple and went away. And when he'd gone away, he hanged himself. The chief priests took the money. We cannot, they said, put these into the treasury, for they are the price of blood. They took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to be a burying place for strangers.
okay.
And that's funny that here the priests are the ones that did the sin by paying the blood money and they won't take it back.
Yeah,
Was it with Jewish law? Remember?
yeah, but
What about the Jewish law of paying to have someone, you know, betrayed?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
complicated.
Let me see if I can get through another little bit here. While Jesus was still speaking, there came Judas, one of the 12, and a great crowd with swords and cudgels from the chief priest and the elders of the people. The traitor had given them a sign. Whom I shall kiss, he said, that is the man. Lay hold on him. Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, Greetings, Master, and kissed him lovingly. Jesus said to him, Comrade, get on with the deed for which you have come. Then they came forward and laid hands on Jesus and held him. And Barclay talks about the word kiss, that two different Greek words are used, that when Judas tells the high priest that I'm going to kiss him, the word he uses, the Greek word is philine, and I'm probably butchering that, which is the normal word for a kiss. But then when he actually did kiss Jesus, the word used is cataphiline, which intensifies the meaning. It is to kiss repeatedly and fervently. And Barclay asked the question, why would Judas do that?
Mhm. It seemed his greeting, having just eaten the Passover meal together, they've just been spending all this time, and then he comes up and greets him like he hasn't seen him in a while.
Yeah.
Bud says it sounds like something from The Godfather.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Barclay also questions the need for Judas to do this to identify Jesus anyway. He says, Jesus was just in the temple a day or two earlier, turning over the tables. Wouldn't the temple guard have recognized him? And considering how many people are there, my personal reaction to that was, they may not have seen him in the crowd, and it's not like we've got television to go back and rerun footage so you could see what he looked like. But that was Barclay's question, was he thinks the temple guard should have known what he looked like.
Plus, it was at night when they came to get him.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then Barclay says Judas does not even appear as a witness at the trial. It is far more likely that in one stunning, blinding, staggering, searing moment, Judas saw how he had miscalculated and staggered away into the night, forever a broken and haunted man. Okay, it is 10:51.
Mm.
Let me do this next section because it finishes with Judas. It's only 2 pages. I can do this real quick. When Judas the traitor saw that Jesus had been condemned, he repented, and he brought the 30 shekels back to the chief priest and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed an innocent man. What has that got to do with us? They said. It is you who must see to that. He threw the money into the temple and went away. And then when he'd gone away, he hanged himself. The priest took the money. We cannot put it back into the treasury, for that's the price of blood. And then they went and bought the potter's field, and that's why to this day it is called the field of blood. Then there was fulfilled that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet, when he said, and they took the 30 shekels, the price of him on whom a price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the field of the potter as the Lord instructed me. And so we've already talked about what he did, what happened there. And Barclay says the terrible thing about sin is we cannot put the clock back, and that sometimes people can come to hate the very thing that they gained by sin. So Judas, gained this money. It was the equivalent of 6 months' pay. And then he hates the money and tries to give it back.
We have to realize too that between the time of the kiss and the time of the last reading that you gave, the traitor's end, that's moving all the way into chapter 27. So
Yeah.
it says when Judas the traitor saw that Jesus had been condemned, because it sounds like the way we're reading it, that right after the kiss,
Right.
Jesus saw, so we have to go back as we're reading, in 27, what happened between those 2 points to really get a
Right.
perspective.
Right, because it was right after he was taken before Pilate. So
Right.
he had not been condemned to death, but Judas then saw that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well,
Saw
yeah.
real quickly then. It seems to me he saw real quickly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time to discuss the concept of the big sin that changes people's lives, and people look back at their life and they see their life before the big sin and their life after the big sin. I mean, I know people who have gotten into adulterous situations, and to comment on what Susan said, you end up hating the thing, the person that created the sin situation, and how it affects people in terms of You know, Judas, I mean, if you look at his life before, he was a pretty good person. He was a disciple, he was helping people, he was keeping track of the money. And then all of a sudden, to quote an old friend of mine, his life went from sugar to shit in a New York minute. The concept of the big sin.
Well,
Like I said, I wish we had more time to
Well, maybe
discuss
we
it, because I think it's very thought provoking.
well, think about it. Maybe we'll talk some about it next week.